one of them's from here, from Galicia. Yeah. Let me make sure I get my name straight. So that is, yes, if I'm pronouncing it right, that's Olena Tejila, or Teliha, who was feminist member of UN, who was executed in a concentration camp in 1942. And that is Sofia something, Sofia Rusal. I think Rusola, Sofia Rusola. She was a feminist writer, poet, Ukrainian.
And first.
That is, they call her the Molly Pitchers. During the American Civil War and then during the Revolution before, women helped men fight. That was the story anyway. And they became medics on the field. And this might not have ever happened, but it's a popular myth. Yeah.
From here, this current was started.
Sure.
From here, this current was started. Think about feminism. From country, from America or Ukraine.
Well, we can talk about that. Hello.
Hello.
Generally, feminism is said to be a Western idea, but there's a specific reason for that. Not all cultures have the same attitude towards women that most Western cultures have. Western societies tend to be more patriarchal, meaning that men have more power societally. And there are other cultures, and for example, there are some cultures in Peru and parts of East Asia where women, in fact, have more power in certain relationships. It's more complicated than that, but generally speaking, feminism is, yes, seen as coming from the West, not specifically America necessarily. It's a literary, philosophical, artistic tradition, and now intellectual in its own right. Are we ready to start?
Yeah.
I guess so, right? Make sure this is turned on. So, there we go. As I was saying, these are some kind of feminist figures, two of them from Ukraine, although I guess I should have picked more popular ones. And two of these are from American popular culture. This right here is a representation of women who assisted during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. And typically, this is said to be a myth that they actually assisted in the combat, but women helped in terms of battlefield injuries, they worked as nurses. This is a later representation from the Second World War of an American steel worker. Her name is Rosie the Riveter. She's probably one of the most famous propaganda posters ever made, certainly in America. So these were a series of propaganda posters that were actually created by the US government during the war effort. And what happened was, due to the amount of men who were fighting in the war, I think the same happened all over the world, women had to start stepping up in industrial jobs in the United States. So Rosie was a riveter. Women worked on assembly lines building aircraft, tanks, weapons of all kinds. And they even took all the jobs at that point that men used to do, and they accomplished all of their work tasks as normal. And this is seen as kind of a defining moment in at least American feminism. You can imagine that after the war, all these women weren't really willing to go back to mopping the house, just that. And the other two are figures from Ukrainian history. But the first thing to talk about is that big word, feminism. So we're going to start as usual with discussion. I think everyone in this room will have a different understanding. Do you guys want to tell me what you think feminism is? Tell me what you think feminism is, and do you consider yourself a feminist? We'll ask this question again, I think, at the end of the presentation. Why don't you start us off, Yaroslav?
Well, I think feminism is a bunch of philosophical in a way, yeah. But I think, for example, there were thoughts about that feminists want to be stronger than men or like have more rights or something. Well, I don't think like that. So I believe in the equality between genders and the equal rights and all that.
Okay. Very good nuanced opinion. So you addressed the baggage of the term, but you also mentioned a more specific definition. Good. Who else would like to tell me what they think feminism is and whether they consider themselves a feminist? I would expect that all of you would contribute here. This is important. Lexi?
For me, it's just a social movement.
Social movement.
Yes, and I don't consider myself as a feminist because I don't think about it all the time, and actually I don't care about it at all.
Okay, interesting. So you see yourself
And
as
I suppose that most of population in our country
in Ukraine.
think the
You see.
same. Men and women the same. Not everybody goes and thinking all the time. And what is feminism? What I can do for feminism?
Yeah,
And
it can seem strange to say, as someone asks you, are you a feminist? And you think, well, I don't do anything. What do you mean? How can I be something? I don't do anything that makes me a feminist, you might think, right? Okay, I understand your position. And obviously in Ukraine, it's a different question, right? Good contribution. Thank you, Lexi. Please.
In my opinion, if you compare to level, for example, it's men, it's women. If you back to history, and it was maybe like this, yeah.
Okay.
But in our time, I guess it should be like this.
Okay.
But feminism want to make just kind of like this.
Okay. I'm glad you said that. We're going to
Yes.
address that as well. So you think that feminists want more rights than men?
Yeah.
Okay.
In social, but if you talk about everything in the world, about science, about everything what was explored before, but it was made with men, yeah.
By men. Okay.
But I really don't know a lot of good thing what was made from women.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for your contribution. Please. Who else? Let's move back and then back up front. Who else would like to? Yeah.
Okay. I think that feminism it is not the war against men
Okay.
because it is like a religion. Religion is something like for everyone it's have everyone's sense. Like for me, feminism is not a war against man or to be stronger than man. I think in Ukraine we have a little bit problem with that because at the same profession the man gets more pay than women, and it is a famous fact.
Yes.
So it
In
is,
America as well.
yeah, and so I think it is we are not in the same like way, and I don't know what to add.
But would you consider yourself a feminist then?
A part of.
A part.
I think
Okay.
that it is, if we're talking about man things or women things in the house or something like that, I don't understand that because but if to talk in that way, I'm feminist.
Okay. Because you don't believe that women should do all the cooking. And
Yeah,
men should
I
do-
think
see what
if
you're saying.
women work
Uh-huh.
in the same concept that men,
Mhm.
that's why we don't have to have women things and man things.
Gotcha. But the other stuff you're not sure. Okay, thank you. Good contribution. More people. Hello. Who else would like to tell me? And then maybe we'll move on. I don't think we have time for everybody. What is feminism, and do you consider yourself a feminist? That's all.
Well, I suppose feminism in the past was very productive and was very important for women.
Okay.
Because first of all, we couldn't have education, and men could have education, and I think that's very important for us. I agree with feminism in the past, but now a lot of feminists are like there. There are too many feminists and too much feminism right now, especially when women think that they have to do all the job that men do. But I suppose that there are some jobs that are not good for women, like physical job, and we want to show that we can do every single job that men do. I'm talking about inadequate feminists. The idea of feminism is not bad, but only about the past. Right now, I think we have everything. Girls, women have everything, at least in Europe. We have all the possibilities right now, so we don't have to make any movements anymore, in my opinion. Maybe in other countries, maybe there are some nationalities where women are, well, literally, I don't know, psychologically killed, morally, that they can't do anything, they're not allowed to do anything. But for example, in Ukraine, we're allowed to do a lot of things, and women who don't want to cook, they don't cook. Men who don't want to do job and want to cook, they cook. So roles changed, and that's fun.
Okay.
So
Thank
yeah.
you, Natalia. So would you consider yourself a feminist, though?
I'm a feminist of the past, but right now, no, I don't think so.
Do we understand the difference between the word feminism, which I'll have the definition in a moment, and the evolving, I guess, social movements which are attached to feminism? Have you ever heard of the waves of feminism? We might talk about it. Okay. But there was a period of time, obviously, where feminist activism was oriented around, like Natalia mentioned, getting the right to vote, getting access to education, things like this. So things have changed.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I will interrupt
No,
you.
please.
And also, a lot of women in the past could not go anywhere without their man.
Right.
Yeah, and that's why, thanks to feminists, we are allowed to do this right now. So that's great. We have a lot of rights thanks to feminism in the past.
In Arab world, now it's habit.
Mhm.
Women can't go out without.
It's a habit?
Without. Yes, in Iraq, Arab Emirates, and
Mostly,
so on.
I wouldn't know. Yeah, interesting. Okay, I want at least like 2 more contributions. Good to see you.
Especially in Muslim world.
So to catch you up, so we're discussing feminism.
Yes, okay, I don't know.
And I would love to ask you, if you could give me a definition, what is feminism and do you consider yourself a feminist?
It's difficult, it's a very hard question because of gender policy, but women, they have to keep their own way. Just, it's a hard question, just, it's philosophy.
This is a careful man, I like this. Yeah. It's a hard question. I want one more contribution, maybe.
So I kind of disagree with Natalia. Like I agree that in the past it was more important to get the rights, like women's rights, because we couldn't even have a bank account either or anything. But still, I don't feel there is this equality or for example, socially accepted behavior is not the same in a man than in a woman. So there is still some stigma, I believe. So, and we are lucky that we have all of us the same rights, but there are a lot of countries where they don't have the same rights. So we need to fight for equality somehow. So for me, feminism is trying to equal the balance, you know?
Okay.
And of course, there are a lot of ways to claim that you are feminist. I agree that some people are just take everything to another level or take it personal when sometimes it's not feminism, and they claim this is feminism. And
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that covered all the viewpoints more or less. What is feminism? Simply, this is the academic definition which I received in school, which I think is good. Feminism. Feminism is the belief in social, economic, and political equality of the sexes. That's it. That's all feminism this simple noun is. That's all it is. So, like I mentioned before, feminism, this simple definition, is divorced from the evolving political social movements. Obviously, this mentions social and political, right? But this only references the equality. This doesn't reference where people will take the direction of these various organizations, various social movements. That's it. If you believe in the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes, you're a feminist. So that's simple enough. All right. And I'm glad that we were hearing some of it in the room. So obviously there's a more modern sort of conception of feminism, which I think is due in part to things like this. So this is the 60 Shades of Feminism. This is a representation of the different categories and subcategories of, I guess, academic or social political feminism which have evolved. I'm obviously not going to read these, but the point of this is to illustrate that what has happened is that people that are identifying themselves as part of certain smaller groups want their own feminisms, different isms. So black feminism here, which is actually a very major movement in America. Some of these are, I mean, not representative of huge amounts of people, but I'll highlight a couple. Black feminism. Black feminists think that historically in America at least, feminist approaches were oriented towards granting more rights that were favorable to white women. They distinguish between white feminism, white middle-class feminism, and the feminism that affects them in their daily lives, their lived experience. Also, radical feminism. I think radical feminism is the kind of thing that many of us think about when we hear like the term, like man-hating feminists. So this is probably what it comes from. That's not me saying that that's what they are, but I think that's the perception. But this is just to illustrate the point that we were saying, oh, well, we like the classic feminism. Well, and then the new feminism, what is it? Well, look, there's a lot here for whatever reason. If there's one more I would mention, hello, hey guys, welcome. Obviously, if there's one more I would mention, the parts of the evolving feminism which are oriented towards people that are not heterosexual. So there are different identities tied up in that as well. But basically, that's what Natalia was referencing. Okay, so key terms. So have you heard any of these? I don't know. We were discussing earlier, you mentioned where did the term feminism come from? Well, the key idea, I guess, is this idea of patriarchy.
For sure.
So we should recognize that word, right? Hierarchical, structured society in which men hold more power. And what is sexism? The idea that women are inferior to men, put simply. Hence, the idea of feminism is that they are correcting the imbalance of sexism and patriarchy. Moving on. Misogyny, I think we've probably heard this word. Hatred of women. Misandry, on the other hand, hatred of men. We might use these terms. This is about consent. Can anyone explain consent? Thank you. You shouldn't have owned.
Okay, it's not bad. Consent means that before you get into sexual intercourse with a partner, you should make sure that they are willing to do so.
And this is the affirmative consent model, which means it's not just like, I think they're willing to do so, but it's like you actually ask more or less.
Yeah.
You make sure. Male gaze, I ran across this, I think, years ago as kind of a philosophical, borderline like Freudian term, but basically it's the idea that the world, media in particular, is oriented through the eyes of men. Men sexualize women, therefore the male gaze. It's a way of looking at women as sexual objects. You hear that? Privilege, I think you hear this word quite a bit now. So this is not just in reference to patriarchy, but privilege is the idea that some people in society have more benefits than others due to some characteristics. And sex positivity, this comes up after the women's civil rights movement in America. the idea that sexual relations should not be seen as shameful. Women have control of their sex lives, and women can have sex for pleasure, which was controversial. So it's still controversial.
You
So-
forget about matriarchy.
Matriarchy,
Yes.
please. Let's talk about matriarchy.
It's opposite to patriarchy.
And it is the opposite to patriarchy. I knew you guys would know all of these very Greek, Latin sort of terms. Yes, matriarchy is just the opposite of patriarchy. And as I mentioned kind of in the beginning, you mentioned where does feminism come from and why? Well, obviously it would have come from patriarchal societies. But there are matriarchal societies in the world where this does not apply, so it makes sense. What is Ukraine? Patriarchy or a matriarchy?
It's patriarchy.
Natalia.
That's who asking me.
But
But in Russia,
but I thought the man was the head and the woman was the neck, so it kind of like works out.
in
Right?
Russia, in Yakutia region,
In Yakutsk.
not in Yakutsk, but that region,
Okay, what about it?
Yakutia, there are some tribes with matriarchy.
Yeah, it's a
Even
common
now.
tribal arrangement where a woman, I forget the other culture, I forget if it was Peru, it was an Andean culture, but basically the women will take like multiple husbands. So it happens.
The chief of the tribe.
Yeah.
Already.
Do you think that's good or bad?
No, it depends on situation, depends on environment. In order to survive, maybe it's,
Okay.
it's good.
Practical considerations, maybe.
Yeah.
That's the way it was explained to me. Okay, so we have these terms. We're going to ask another kind of personal question. You can think about what role your gender, whether you're a man or a woman, has had in the different opportunities you've had in life. And have you ever experienced discrimination? Again, this goes for both men and women. This is a presentation on feminism, but feminism. So why don't we hear that? This should be good. Who can share an opportunity they had because of their gender, or didn't have because of their gender?
In Ukraine, it's very hard because like everyone's thinking that women need just stay at home, take care of family, and be saying that you want to make like business or you want to have serious job, and like mostly they're like, oh seriously?
Yeah.
You're not married? You're 24?
24. It's getting old.
And you know, like your age, it's almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Natalia. I think discrimination is an issue here because very often in our society, women that choose not to have marriage or children or are willing to do so but just haven't met their right guy yet, they're considered somehow dysfunctional or like crazy or something like this. And I have a cousin who's 31 and everybody's bugging her with like this stuff, like why aren't you married yet? And like my family they say horrible things to her, like why don't you get knocked up? Why don't you have it in vitro? Why don't you, I don't know, grab the first man you see on the street and
Yeah.
I was in this.
You're in it now. You're in it now. You have an opinion? I know you do.
I'm gonna let everyone else contribute
Okay.
because I speak English.
Okay. Well played. Who else would like to share on this topic? Perhaps a male opinion.
I think
Woman
that
inside.
male could be could be discriminated on basis of sex. It might be in family, just family relationship.
Well, perhaps.
But otherwise, or just
Well,
it's
if
very
you,
seldom.
yeah, I see
Could
what
be
you
some-
mean. When we think of discrimination, we think, or a lack of opportunity, we think of it in a different way. But how about if we just broaden it out and we think, are there different expectations for men than there are for women?
Well, he makes a valid point. Like, I mean, men are considered to be like more masculine and like, you know, oh, you can't move the table because you know you need a man to do that. And so
Right.
like, not all men are up to that
That's what I'm saying.
not.
So all men are judged by that, just like, you know, in the same system, men are judged by this metric that they don't all meet, just like women are.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so they are encouraged to hide their emotions, and in Ukraine at least, they are strongly seen as breadwinners. So if a man doesn't provide for his family or like doesn't provide enough, in the opinion of the woman, and sometimes it comes to the point where a man is supposed to like satisfy every whim of a woman, then he's somehow dysfunctional. So yeah, I agree that discrimination works both ways, unfortunately.
In America, financial problems are the #1 reason for divorce. What is the #1 reason for divorce in Ukraine? I don't know. Probably the same?
No, I believe misunderstanding.
Yes,
Interesting.
Misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding. Let's hear it. Like
In some-
communication.
Yes, in some period of time when passions, I don't know, came to an end and a couple partners, they start nag at each other at some miserable things, and they just misunderstand. So they don't want to understand each other anymore, and probably this is the reason #1 of divorce in Ukraine. I have never learned that question, but it's
It's very often, measurable problem, some simple things, but it's lead to a divorce. It's very often happen.
Okay.
But concerning the financial, it's also some kind of problem, but it just everyone have a low position, and they must keep the situation.
Well, I think that in Ukraine at least, most couples who just don't understand each other, don't get along or something, they still get divorced, because divorce is still seen as something shameful or like a bad thing, and just because you don't get along with your partner, it doesn't seem like a good enough reason to get divorced. So people might hate each other for years, but still live together. Whereas financial problems are seen as a big deal. So yeah.
Got it. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? No one's experienced discrimination on the basis of sex, specifically.
Just don't want to talk about it.
Just don't wanna talk. We'll move through, okay? Cool. So, a little bit,
Maybe I'm not alone.
that's fair enough, yeah. So a little bit of history, this is from the American perspective now. We'll watch 2 videos here. This is what Natalia back there was mentioning about the old feminism. So this was the fight for political, social, economic equality part of feminism we were talking about in American history. This is contrasted with what people said about feminists and what people, I guess, still say. Some people, although I think the discussion has changed about feminists. They say, and these are mine that I wrote, but this is the main thing that I've heard and that I've observed and synthesized. People say feminism makes women less feminine. If women start going to work, if women start pursuing leadership positions in companies, if women start, you get the idea, they will become somehow less a woman. Because a woman is a caretaker, not a breadwinner. A woman is not like a man in that way. Therefore, feminism will make women unhappy. Women are unhappy, family unit has problems, feminism is bad for traditional society and the nuclear family. So that's the debate as it was in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and sometimes today. Does that line up with what Ukraine experienced, or is it different because of our history here?